can't wait to see an hour-long video rant overanalyzing every individual aspect of the video except the arguments you made and say nope, you are nitpicking and biased. I win, bye-bye.
Whoa, whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Oh boy. So a lot has happened, that much is obvious, but I didn't really feel like making these kinds of videos anymore. However, due to recent circumstances, it feels necessary to take this opportunity to call out bullshit when I see it. Under the Mayo proves once again that he does not understand the purpose of Ultrakill's game design, and is framing the game as something it isn't, being extremely disingenuous with his criticisms, which completely weigh down the praise he gives the update for this game. Before I start responding to Mayo's video on Ultrakill Act 2, I must make a few things clear. I understand that my response to Mayo's style meters analysis may have come off as unhinged, and I apologize for that. But my points in that video still stand, as it shows Mayo being an oblivious charlatan when it comes to critiquing games such as Ultrakill. As I have proven on numerous occasions, as well as other YouTubers out there, Mayo's criticisms on games like this are extremely flawed, as they come off as either extremely disingenuous, missing the point, or just a downright lie. And unfortunately, Mayo seems to have a hard time understanding these counter-arguments towards these criticisms, especially when you take into consideration that Mayo will go out of his way to deflect any sort of criticism whatsoever regarding his reviews. In Psychonautic Therapy's video responding to Mayo's Sifu review, I said this: if Doom Eternal is applied to any argument that contradicts Mayo's points, he chooses to retaliate. To prove this statement, I showcased a screenshot where Mayo responded to one of my criticisms regarding my response to his analysis on style meters. Long story short, he has no argument, and instead chooses to retaliate and tries to destroy my credibility. And this is all because I compared Ultrakill's AI to Doom Eternal's in order to criticize Mayo's take. And if that's not enough proof to show that Mayo doesn't like being criticized, especially when you bring up his favorite game to use against him, then look no further than his Elden Ring disaster stream, where someone in Mayo's chat calls him out for contradicting himself by bringing Doom Eternal into the equation, while he was complaining about playing a game he knew beforehand that he would never like, but chose to make it his fundraiser goal anyways.
Morgan, that doesn't even make sense. Because if you ignore that stuff if you go into Doom Eternal and you have no idea what the fuck you're doing, and you ignore what the game is showing you, you die. You don't progress.
How unfortunate of Mayo to unknowingly prove my point even further, where he will choose to retaliate against any criticisms whenever Doom Eternal is used in an argument to call out his hypocrisies. It's even more ironic that he even feels the need to point out how Doom Eternal punishes you for dying from not learning the game's mechanics, when all throughout the very stream regarding Elden Ring, Mayo flat out chose to intentionally not learn the game's mechanics solely for the fact that he does not like Souls games. And with such a poetic irony, he keeps getting punished for dying, and complains about it. I find that it's only fair that I attack your credibility as an expert on game design when you have chosen to retaliate against my arguments about your video by attacking my credibility. I should also point out that Mayo has chosen to ban people from his Twitch chat for criticizing him, as well as banning someone from his Discord server for saying that he doesn't understand Elden Ring. I cannot stress enough that when your main premise on YouTube is to review games, you should not deflect criticisms towards your videos with non-arguments, ban people for said criticisms, and throw a hissy fit whenever things don't go your way. The reason I feel the need to point any of this out before talking about his review on Ultrakill Act 2 is because Mayo has showcased a pattern where he'll make himself out as some sort of expert on game design and offer solutions as to how to make a game better, but ultimately all of his arguments fall flat as soon as you dissect them. And also the fact that he lacks basic knowledge on certain games to the point that it makes me question whether or not he should continue critiquing these games. I mean, the dude apparently doesn't know what a build is.
What build do you plan to make? I don't know what builds are.
And my response to his style meters analysis was meant to showcase how Mayo has double standards regarding certain video games, and blatantly lies about key things, such as DMC5, where he makes a false argument that the Deluxe Edition forces you to play a quote-unquote sabotaged version of the game by giving you bonus red orbs. But like the oblivious charlatan that he is, he left out the very important detail that you can untick the orbs from your collection, which destroys his argument about how you're forced to play a so-called sabotaged version of the game. So the thing you should take away from all of this is that Mayo lacks basic knowledge of how certain games work, has double standards for certain games, especially in the context of style meters, and likes to create false arguments in order to downplay certain mechanics in games. Now, with all that out of the way, we can begin responding to Mayo's review on Ultrakill Act 2. I will be skipping the first 4 minutes of this video as it adds nothing to the discussion. It's just a dumb skit that honestly should be used at the end of the video rather than the beginning, because it would be better to get to the point rather than waste our time being criminally unfunny.
Well, in a way. When the new Act 2 update came out, I was excited to try it because I heard about the change to the style meter. I've been saying for a while that one of Ultrakill's biggest problems is the arbitrary nature of its style meter, that it should have some kind of impact on gameplay as a reward for engaging with it.
Before this update even came out, Ultrakill's style meter did have ties to what you did in the gameplay. Weapon freshness was already a mechanic within the game, and all the Act 2 update ever did was improve it. There's also the fact that Ultrakill's style meter encourages different moves, not only because it greatly affects how fast you rank up, but because they are incredibly useful mechanics that have proven to be significantly useful in killing enemies as quickly and as stylishly as possible. So in a way, Ultrakill's style meter was never arbitrary as you like to claim. It is, and always has been, a clear visual indicator that is there to judge you for your performance, and the different types of moves you perform in Ultrakill greatly affect the outcome of your ranking, and how fast you can complete encounters.
They called me crazy. They said I should just be styling because it's fun. It doesn't need to be integrated into the combat.
It's not that the style meter itself should not be integrated into the combat. It's the fact that you criticize the game for letting you do lane play by using the charge shot on the pistol only. But we will get to that later.
Well, here we are with the new version of Ultrakill that rewards the player with better health regeneration through the style meter by speeding up the reduction of hard damage. Hey, that's a great idea. I feel like I've heard it somewhere before. There's so many things you could do to make the stylish mechanics actually mean something. Maybe the style meter tied into a health regeneration system. So you're welcome, Ultrakill players. I'm happy that I was able to make your game better, me alone.
Another pattern that Mayo showcases in these videos, especially in his more recent ones, is that he feels entitled about how game developers should listen to him for how they should make changes to their games. It comes off as incredibly narcissistic to give yourself credit for what the developers do with their game, when in reality they probably didn't even need your input specifically in order to come up with this implementation. It's a bit naive to claim that you were the one that influenced this design decision. In fact, the thing that most likely influenced the changes to the style meter is how Hakita chose to nerf the Whiplash, and in order to counteract this design decision, he chose to make it so that the hard damage's impact on your health is lessened based on how high your rank is on the style meter. So to act like you are the sole reason the game has received this change is a bit disingenuous.
Hard damage is accumulated as you get hit and temporarily lowers your max HP. As your style meter increases, this hard damage is reduced faster, making it easier to survive. The style meter itself has also been rebalanced to reward weapon freshness, decreasing the amount of style points you get for just abusing one gun, encouraging variety, which is another excellent change. This is what I've been asking for. I personally still think the game needs a huge redesign to make ammo limited, with traditional pickups around the arenas and a style meter that regenerates ammo so you're rewarded with infinite ammo from a stylish performance. Because without it, the first 4 chapters of the game continue to suffer. It's still a runaway charged pistol spam fest for the most part.
Oh shit, here we go again.
And here we go again, the same dumb criticism he showcased in his style meters analysis. Pistol too overpowered. I feel as though I've poorly constructed my point in my previous response to Mayo, but let me try to explain as best as I can this time on why this is such a stupid complaint. What you are doing is lane play. intentionally limiting your own options on how to fight these encounters, when it's not the most effective way to do so. You can use the revolver only if you want, but that's not the fault of the game, rather it is an issue on your part. Ultrakill has a sandbox in all of its levels. It encourages experimentation on all of your weapons, and it's not just because doing so boosts your rank, but it also makes dealing with enemy encounters so much easier. This may seem like a weird comparison, but Mayo has made this exact same complaint towards Halo Infinite's campaign, where he complains about how the game lets you choose to do lane play by sniping enemies from a far distance rather than being forced to be up close and personal. Just like with Ultrakill, Halo Infinite is encouraging experimentation with its weapons. It's a sandbox where you are allowed to fight enemies however you want. Whether you want to be up close and personal, or snipe enemies from afar is ultimately up to you, which is the same case as Ultrakill, where you are allowed to use the revolver only if you choose to do so, but then the problem with this strategy is that you are intentionally limiting yourself on how to kill enemies, and thanks to the change of the style meter from the Act 2 update, if you use the revolver only, you are making yourself more vulnerable to death due to how hard damage has been reworked. Ultrakill is ultimately about being creative with your attacks, which is why the style meter exists in the first place. And thus, when you intentionally limit yourself to just one weapon, you are limiting your creativity on how to complete levels. You yourself criticized people in the past for not being creative with their attacks in Doom Eternal, especially when it came to the Marauder. You yourself have given countless examples on how to deal with this enemy, and people praised you for pointing these out. But now when it comes to Ultrakill, you are becoming the same people in the past that you have criticized. Relying on one weapon throughout a giant portion of the game is not a good strategy, and it is not a problem with the game itself as you love to claim. Which brings me to my next point. Your suggestion for adding ammo management to Ultrakill is extremely flawed, because that's not how the game is supposed to be played. Adding ammo management to Ultrakill similarly to how Doom Eternal does it would make the game unreasonably harder, because it would incredibly limit your creativity. To compensate for this, Ultrakill's ammo is unlimited, but it's worth mentioning that Ultrakill does already have this sort of incentive to switch weapons outside of the style meter. The Piercer, the Marksman, both variations of the Nail Gun, all three variations of the Rail Cannon, and the Time Stop ability on the rocket launcher all have their separate cooldowns. It is to prevent you from abusing these abilities entirely, otherwise the game would be absolutely broken. Are we just going to gloss over the fact that the alt-fires for all the weapons have cooldowns? How convenient, ignoring important details on how the game's designed.
So let's get into that. Does this update do anything to change my mind about the broken nature of Ultrakill's design regarding infinite ammo, triple air dash, and charge shot pistol? No, it does not. Not for the first 4 chapters, 0 to 3. When I popped in this new Ultrakill update, I said, okay, I haven't played in 6 months, I'm not a very good Ultrakill player, I'm just gonna pick Violent, the hardest difficulty, and screw around like I did before and see how far I make it. And it was the same story. Fight after fight was pretty easily passed by mindlessly dashing around and headshotting everyone and using the charge shot of the starting pistol. The entire prelude is filled with combat encounters that do nothing to make you feel like any other tactic is necessary to experiment with, due to how overwhelmingly powerful you are from the first room.
As I mentioned earlier, this is just lane play in Ultrakill's sandbox, and it's not the game's fault. But keep this criticism of his in mind when we get into something very important.
Oh, the hideous mass boss fight. This guy looks scary. Nope, just hop around and spam pistol until he dies. I mean, I could use other weapons, but this is already pretty effective, and the ammo is infinite. All I gotta do for more health is do a charge shot up in his face and I'm all good again. I don't need to do anything else cause there's no problem to solve here. Just using other weapons to beat it faster doesn't equal fun. Not to me.
Oh, that's pretty ironic there, Mayo. You say that switching weapons constantly to kill enemies faster is not fun to you, but who was it again that has made countless tutorials for Doom Eternal on how to kill enemies more quickly and successfully? It's a bit hypocritical, don't you think? I mean, be honest here. Why is it that you can't experiment with Ultrakill's weapons to deal with enemies more easily like you can in Doom Eternal? With your logic about the pistol being overpowered, I don't see an issue on wanting to use combat shotgun in Doom Eternal only. After all, getting my ammo back is just one button away. Sure, I'd be limiting my creativity. I'm just playing how I want. See the problem here? It's hypocritical to take this approach in Ultrakill when you'll criticize people for not playing Doom Eternal the right way. This is the textbook definition of a double standard.
If I were dying dozens of times by doing this dumb strategy, I'd feel like I should play with more weapons. And that would be fun, because I would be solving a problem.
Sure, you may not be dying from using the pierced revolver only, but you sure are taking a lot of damage from that strategy. Maybe the problem here is that you're intentionally limiting yourself from what you can do against this specific enemy. Maybe you should try using the overheating nail gun on the Hideous Mass's stomach, or use the Piercer's charge shot right before switching to the rail cannon to deal even more damage. There's so many things you can do against this enemy, which further proves my point that Ultrakill has a sandbox, and you're missing out on content that would make the game more intriguing. I mean, are we just gonna ignore the fact that his style meter is not increasing at all? It is actively encouraging him to switch weapons so that not only will he regenerate more health, but do more effective strategies to kill this mini-boss. Not only that, but some people may forget, Ultrakill's endgame rank gives you a huge bonus if you take no damage throughout an entire level. Maybe find a way to do that instead of complaining about lame play.
The story doesn't change until the V2 boss fight, and that is one of my central issues with this game's design and the way the fanbase defends it. I hear all the time that it's not about being forced to play well, it's about being stylish, cause styling on enemies is fun. If I want surviving the game to be challenging, I'm missing the point. Well, then why is the V2 boss fight so demanding? I'm not complaining that it's a hard boss fight. I got my ass kicked by him the first time, and I got my ass kicked again this time. That's good. I actually had to play well to beat him. But doesn't that go against what everyone says? That the challenge of Ultrakill comes from going for P rank or whatever, not the actual passing of the game's levels? Is this supposed to be a hard skill-based game or not? If all you want to do is style on fools, maybe you'd be happy with an endless arena of enemies that just stand there not attacking, and you can style to your heart's content with no cumbersome challenges getting in your way.
Okay. So, Mayo, you just proved my point correct that you don't understand Ultrakill, and that by relying on lane play with using the Piercer only, you are not learning anything. See, think of the prelude as some sort of tutorial on how to play the game at its peak. When you start killing enemies, you are told how effective other strategies are, such as parries and interruptions. In the very next level, you are forced to buy the marksman pistol, where the game will teach you how coins work. Later on, you fight the swords machine, which not only gives you the shotgun if you beat its first phase, but also gives you a visual indicator that you can parry the swords machine's attacks. Then you're told how to use several mechanics with the shotgun, such as how it can pierce weaker enemies, projectile boosts, the other mod for the shotgun, and if you really want to test yourself, you can learn how to dash the moment you fire the pump shotgun at an overloading limit, or shoot a grenade from the shotgun and switch to the pistol in order to form a more deadlier explosion. Later in Limbo, you gain the nail gun, which showcases that it can be useful against specific enemies, like drones and malicious faces. Then you are met with street cleaners, which teach you the fact that not all attacks can be parried, but have to be avoided entirely, and then can be insta-killed by tossing a coin behind its back and shooting it. The Hideous Mass mini-boss is there to teach you about weak points on enemies in order to kill them more effectively. And then there's V2, which is basically the barrier to entry for new players. V2 is a very hard boss fight in the first playthrough because by the time you reach this boss, you are expected to have learned the game's mechanics, and it's expecting you to use your entire arsenal at its peak. The fact that you got your ass kicked on your second run through this boss fight directly proves my point that you are intentionally going out of your way to not learn what the game's all about. Creativity. V2 is a test on how creative you can be in order to defeat it as stylishly and as quickly as you can. You are basically failing that test by forcing yourself to stick to one weapon, and then expecting the same outcome when encountering V2. Which again, is the barrier to entry for new players. Intentionally ignoring mechanics from the game that can vastly help you go through levels much easier completely contradicts your ideology of how games need to push you into their systems through challenge. The challenge of Ultrakill is to be efficient, be fast, and be stylish, and potentially replay the game as much as you can to the point that you become literally untouchable, and gain a bonus for not taking damage. This is where I'll circle back to my criticisms towards Mayo's argument about how the Piercer is an overpowered starting weapon. And it's also somewhat of a response towards his Challenge Matters video. Ultrakill does things entirely different than what Mayo expects. Ultrakill doesn't necessarily punish you for playing the game wrong, as I believe there is no wrong way to play it. Even if you may face consequences for sticking to one weapon, but rather, Ultrakill's niche is that it's testing you to see how creative you can be with your attacks. See, what I get from Ultrakill is that Hikita has designed this game solely around positive reinforcement. In other words, as I mentioned in my response to Mayo's style meters analysis, it's a psychological mechanic that encourages you to try out new things and see the outcome. The game is merely telling you that there are other ways that you can do these levels, ways that you may end up having a lot of fun executing. In fact, it actually worked in a way when Mayo was talking about this game in his style meters analysis.
And I'll admit, now that I know how to play Ultrakill after spending hours in it, if I play with the goal of trying to get through the levels as quickly as possible and get a high ranking, I end up having a lot more fun.
He admits in that clip that Ultrakill is fun to play when you set your goal to defeat enemies as fast and as effectively as you can, while getting a high rank in the process. But he still criticized it due to the fact he thinks that the style meter in the game was arbitrary, and because he feels like it's unnecessary since he could just stick to one gun. And the problem I have with this argument of his is that he points it out as an objective flaw with the game. It's not bad game design to let players do whatever sort of strategy they want, and not get punished for it. And yes, that includes sticking to the piercer. Ultimately, the game has an entirely different ideology rather than trying to push you into its systems through challenge. Instead, what it's doing is encouraging you to do techniques that prove to be a lot more useful. It's there to convince you that there are a lot more fun ways to play the game. The problem here is that you are choosing not to. You are intentionally ignoring the game's suggestions on how you can have more fun playing the game. You don't find it fun because you're choosing not to. Or maybe this is a case where Ultrakill is just not your type of game. If you left it at that and said Ultrakill isn't the kind of game you want to play because of how the game encourages you to have fun doing other things rather than forcing you to learn mechanics through challenge, that would have been fine. My issue is that you are pointing out this game's ideology as a concrete flaw, when in reality it isn't. It's just how the game was designed, to psychologically reward you for playing the best you can, and in a way that you can consider fun and replayable. That is the purpose of Ultrakill's game design, and it's not inherently bad like you claim it is. Anyways, I feel like I got my point across, so let's move on.
I, on the other hand, want the game to present a challenge overall, not just in an end-of-level ranking system. That's why I'm happy to see a difficult boss fight finally. It doesn't make me use every single option and tactic there are, no game is going to do that, but it pushes me to experiment a little more, and that's what a game needs to do.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Mayo sticks to the ideology that a video game is required to push you to learn its mechanics through challenging gameplay, which is made very clear in this portion. He likes the V2 boss fight because it's hard and you need to experiment more with your weapons. I just need to get it more clear from here on out, because Mayo does like to push the narrative that this is a requirement for any video game in existence. But it's not inherently bad game design to encourage people to try out other things rather than being forced to. Mayo likes claiming that this is a very ineffective way to execute a game because there's no real incentive to do so, but this is not the case. If this style of gameplay was so ineffective as Mayo likes to claim, then he should try to explain to me on why Ultrakill is so beloved. I mean, it's literally in the top 10 most positive rated Steam games of all time, which I feel like should say something by itself. I'm not saying Mayo is claiming that people are dumb for liking this game, but what I am saying is that Mayo is using this criticism to unfairly make Ultrakill out as a very poorly designed game by saying that this ideology is ineffective in encouraging players to experiment with the game's mechanics. I feel like this completely contradicts one of the points he made in the past where he said that he respects a good game even if he doesn't personally enjoy it. He says that he respects the game developer's vision, but when criticizing a game for how it's designed, he'll suggest that they should go against their vision and redesign something entirely. I feel like this comment from Pat Crane sums it up pretty well. There's a saying in writing that when you're in a workshopping group, you need to be careful about how you approach criticizing someone else's in-progress story, because you can inadvertently push them towards writing the story that you want to read rather than the one they want to write. This, I feel like, is what Mayo's review on Ultrakill Act 2 comes off as, since he basically wants Ultrakill in its entirety to get revamped in order to satisfy what he wants in a video game, rather than what the game itself is trying to accomplish. And that just ain't it, Chief.
The problem is that the game does nothing in the levels leading up to this boss fight to make you feel like any real strategy is actually important. There are 5 stages in the Prelude and 3 stages in the Limbo chapter that hardly contain a sliver of demanding combat to make me stop relying on runaway charge pistol spam.
Well, considering my point earlier about how your criticism of this game's design is very flawed, this comes off as more of a you problem more than an actual flaw of the game, because essentially what the game is doing for a lot of players is encouraging the strategies that you yourself have overlooked solely for the fact that you find it just as successful using nothing but the piercer. So again, the problem is that you're intentionally limiting yourself to what you can accomplish and find fun to play, because believe it or not, there are way more effective strategies against malicious faces. Like, you could parry its projectiles, you could go up close to the malicious face and quick swap both of your shotguns, and once you unlock weapons such as the nail gun and rail cannon, you could do other strategies with those weapons. That's the entire point of Ultrakill, as it may not force you to use its mechanics, but it encourages you to, since that's what the developer sees as a fun way to play the game.
And then suddenly you're fighting the hardest enemy in the game that's treating you like you're already a seasoned veteran.
That is not the hardest enemy in the game, Mayo. That is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Ultrakill's bosses. And since you like it when a game challenges you, like what V2 is doing with you right now, then maybe you should challenge yourself to get P rank on every single level in Act 1, and go fight the secret boss, Minos Prime. And before you say to me that it's irrelevant, no, it isn't. You're missing the point on why people are telling you to fight Minos Prime. The Prime Sanctums in Ultrakill is the game's way of telling you that you are worthy of playing this secret encounter. You have to prove yourself worthy in order to unlock them by playing the game the way that it asks you to. If you were given access to Minos Prime without learning the game's mechanics through experimentation, you are not going to beat this boss, period. So again, stop acting like the game's badly designed for not forcing you to use anything, but rather encourage it.
It's like raising a child for 18 years and handing them everything in life, never asking them to do anything like cook, clean, work, fix something, and then suddenly kicking them out on the street and saying, "Find a way to survive or die, kid, good luck." That's no way to raise a strong person and set them up for success.
Again, the game is not designed around forcing you to do anything. It's just encouraging you to do something that can be considered fun and a lot more effective. If you want to play dumb and use piercer only, that's perfectly fine, but don't act like the game doesn't encourage you to do things other than that outside of the boss fights. That is disingenuous to claim, and you're falsely painting this game in a bad light with this criticism.
After V2, the game goes back to being pretty easy to pass with a runaway charge pistol spam, and I just don't agree with this kind of structure. If you think it's fine, well, okay. I know there's plenty of people who enjoy freestyling in a vacuum, but I don't want to feel like the skillful play is just occasionally demanded here and there and sprung on me out of nowhere. I want a game that makes me feel like I'm leveling up due to the escalating challenging nature of the level design and AI, eventually testing my learned skills with boss fights.
Yes, Mayo, we get it. You prefer games to give you challenges upon challenges that force you to learn the game's mechanics. You've made it very clear throughout this video, and even past videos, that you think games need to push you into their systems through challenge. And in response to that ideology, I can confirm that this game was not made for you, which is perfectly fine. But once again, the problem comes in where you are acting as if this is a major flaw on the game's part rather than a subjective thing. Because believe it or not, the thing you are criticizing Ultrakill for, a lot of people really appreciate the design decision. Let me make it very clear, Mayo, that a game is not made for everyone. It doesn't appeal to every single person on the planet, and we get the fact that you find it harder to enjoy Ultrakill solely for the fact that the game doesn't force you to do anything that involves playing the game in a more effective way. At the end of the day, enjoyment is subjective, but quality is not. It's perfectly fine if you are not into Ultrakill's gameplay ideology, but don't paint it as if it's the game's fault. That's an unfair criticism on your part.
So much of this game's depth is easy to overlook because of the poor balance of the first 4 chapters, and that's why I said there's no enemy-specific weaknesses. Look, I've seen all the comments listing all the vulnerabilities and tactics for different enemies. Okay, that's fair, but that's not the point. The point is that it's so easy to play the game and never notice them because you can spend like 15 levels not noticing anything. because the infinite ammo starting pistol and lack of combat intensity make it easy to not notice anything.
That's not a concrete issue with the game as you make it out to be. That just tells me that you're unobservant and don't care about what the game has to offer, because I have to point out once again that throughout the entire game, you are encouraged to do different mechanics rather than being forced to do so. This gives off the same energy as your Elden Ring stream, because you've made it abundantly clear in this video, as well as that stream, that you did not care about what the game had to offer, and you didn't want to do anything because of how bored you were. Despite the fact that you give this game's update some praise, I feel like it's watered down due to the fact that you have that same mentality as in that Elden Ring stream, where you are uninterested about what all the other mechanics have to offer. Like I mentioned before, you are intentionally limiting yourself in creativity just by using one weapon.
For as good as Ultrakill's Act 2 additions and rebalancing are, and for as much as I appreciate the steps towards integrating the style meter into the gameplay loop with health regeneration rewards, the game is still really bad at getting you ready for the difficulty spikes.
Actually, that just means you weren't persuaded by the game to learn the mechanics beforehand. I'm glad you like experimenting with these weapons now, since you personally feel like the game is forcing you to do that in this specific instance, but that's where my point from earlier comes in. Clearly this game was not made for you, because it wasn't designed around forcing people to learn its mechanics, but by encouraging it through tutorial levels in the beginning, and potentially discovering new ways to play the game. Without this mentality, people would never have discovered hidden mechanics like the nuke, where you shoot out a shotgun's grenade with a malicious rail cannon, or shoot out a frozen rocket with it, or the ultra ricochet where you shoot out a coin with the rail cannon, or any other sort of tech that's been discovered by now. It's not the game's fault that you chose not to play in a stylish way, it just means the game did not persuade you to use other mechanics that make the game fun. The game merely wants to convince you that there are other ways to play rather than being something along the lines of Doom Eternal, where if you don't play the game right, you get punished for it. That's just how Ultrakill's gameplay was designed, encouraging stylish play and giving you a psychological reward for it. If that's not what you want in a game, that's fine, just don't act like it's a concrete flaw.
The whiplash has been rebalanced to build up hard damage if you're abusing it, which is cool because the insane mobility it grants can definitely trivialize fights sometimes.
This is something that I can actually agree with Mayo on, because I've heard several people argue that the whiplash became useless because of how it was nerfed, when in reality I don't think that's the case. They clearly made this nerf because they knew people would abuse it, so I appreciate the design decision to nerf this mechanic. I don't see how the whiplash became useless from this update. You can still pull off some really cool moves from it and use it to your advantage, and the nerf does not take away from that. So I agree with Mayo on this one.
Looking at the patches, this seems to be something that's still being adjusted, so I'm not going to comment further on it. I like the direction they're taking though. You hear how positive I'm being? It's because when talking about the changes, I'm really inspired by where the game's going. But when I talk about the problems the changes haven't addressed, I get negative all over again. The first 4 chapters of Ultrakill still need serious work to lead the player up to the insanity of the later levels. Without that good pacing, a player can arrive at those later fights having learned nothing, and now it's like they're starting from zero just trying to make it through.
If a player learns nothing from the first 4 levels of Ultrakill, that's entirely their fault, because throughout those levels, the game teaches you about how there are other more useful and fun ways to play the game rather than sticking to one option. So in this case, I feel like you're just projecting your own subjective issues with this game, and again, it's not a concrete flaw as you make it out to be. But that's basically the end of Mayo's review. The last part is him suggesting that Ultrakill should have ammo management again, which again I disagree with entirely because that would limit the creativity that Ultrakill provides. I'm not saying that it's impossible to implement the feature, it's just that I feel like it goes against the author's intent on what game they're trying to make. So with that, that is the end of Mayo's pretty bad review on Ultrakill Act 2. The vast majority of the video was nothing but projecting his own issues with Ultrakill and making it out as if the game is badly designed, which I think is wrong. I think the lesson we should all gather from here today is that Ultrakill is not what Mayo makes it out to be. It's not a badly designed game because of how it doesn't force you to learn its mechanics through challenges, but it's actually a really good game because of how it encourages you to execute so many different mechanics through its sandbox, and in return, it gives you a psychologically satisfying reward in the end. But that's all from me. I hope I made my point clear enough about how Mayo should take people's advice rather than deflect and push this narrative that anything that doesn't satisfy him makes the game bad. It's just not a good way to review games. So, thank you all for watching, be sure to subscribe because I need clout.